My name is Deborah Johnson, and I need to tell you about the night that changed everything. The night I lost the man I loved, the father of my unborn child, and the night I witnessed a murder sanctioned by the state. December 4th, 1969. I was 8 months pregnant, sleeping beside Fred Hampton in our apartment at 2337 West Monroe Street in Chicago. What happened in those early morning hours wasn't a shootout. It wasn't self-defense. It was an execution. Let me take you back to how it all began, because you need to understand who Fred was and why they wanted him dead. That I met Fred Hampton in 1968, during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. The civil rights movement was at its peak. Cities were burning after Dr. King's assassination, and young black people across the nation were tired of waiting for change. Fred was 20 years old when I met him, but he carried himself with the wisdom of someone twice his age. He was the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, and when he spoke, people listened. I mean, really listened. Fred had this gift, this way of breaking down complex political ideas and making them accessible to everyone, from the college-educated to the person on the street who never finished high school. He talked about class struggle, about how poor whites and poor blacks were being pitted against each other by the ruling class while both groups suffered. He organized the Rainbow Coalition, bringing together the Young Patriots, a group of poor white Appalachians, the Young Lords, a Puerto Rican organization, and the Black Panthers. This was revolutionary. This was dangerous to those in power. That I was 19 when I became involved with the Panthers. I grew up on the west side of Chicago, and I'd seen the poverty, the police brutality, the systematic destruction of our communities. The Panthers weren't just talking about revolution, they were living it. We ran the Free Breakfast for Children program, feeding hundreds of kids before school every morning. We had free health clinics, providing medical care to people who couldn't afford it. We taught political education classes. Fred used to say, "We're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we will fight it with socialism." The FBI didn't see it that way. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, called the Black Panthers the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. He created COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, specifically designed to neutralize black political organizations. And Fred Hampton was at the top of their list. That I fell in love with Fred not just because of his charisma or his intelligence, but because of his genuine commitment to the people. He worked 18, 20-hour days. He'd come home exhausted, but he'd still take time to sit with community members who came to our apartment with their problems. When I told him I was pregnant in the spring of 1969, I saw something shift in his eyes. He was going to be a father. We talked about names, about the future, about the world we were trying to build for our child, but we also knew the danger we were in. Fred had been arrested multiple times on trumped-up charges. He'd been shot at. Our apartment was under constant surveillance. We could see the unmarked cars parked outside, the agents following us. Fred used to joke about it, pointing them out. "There go our friends," he'd say with that broad smile of his. But underneath, we both knew this wasn't a game. What we didn't know was that one of our own had betrayed us. William O'Neill had joined the Panthers in 1968 and quickly risen through the ranks to become head of security for the Illinois chapter. Fred trusted him. We all did. What we didn't know was that O'Neill was an FBI informant, being paid by the Bureau to infiltrate the Panthers and report on Fred's activities. And in late 1969, O'Neill did something unforgivable. He drew up a detailed floor plan of our apartment, marking where each person slept, where Fred and I slept, and he gave it to his FBI handlers. December 3rd, 1969, was a Wednesday. It was cold in Chicago, that bitter cold that seeps into your bones. I was so pregnant by then, 8 months along, and everything was uncomfortable. My back ached, my feet were swollen, and sleeping was difficult. Fred had been busy all day with party business, meetings, organizing. That evening, we had some comrades over at the apartment. There was Mark Clark, who was visiting from the Peoria chapter, and several others. We talked late into the night about the work we were doing, about the programs, about the revolution. Around midnight, people started settling down to sleep. Our apartment wasn't large. It was a modest place on the first floor of a 2-story building. Fred and I went to our bedroom. Mark Clark stayed in the living room with his shotgun. This was standard procedure. We always had someone on security because of the constant threats we faced. What I didn't know What none of us knew was that earlier that evening, O'Neill had drugged Fred's drink with secobarbital, a powerful sedative. This was part of the FBI's plan. They wanted Fred incapacitated when they came for him. Fred seemed tired that night, more tired than usual. He lay down next to me in our bed, and within minutes, he was deeply asleep. I remember thinking it was good he was getting rest. He pushed himself so hard. I lay there, my hand on my swollen belly, feeling our baby move inside me. I felt safe in that moment, lying next to the man I loved, carrying his child. I had no idea that in a few hours, everything would be shattered at approximately 4:48 a.m. on December 4th, 1969. I was jolted awake by the sound of the front door being smashed in. My heart immediately started racing. I heard shouting, aggressive male voices, and then gunfire. Loud, explosive gunfire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I shook Fred. Fred! Fred, wake up! He didn't respond. I shook him harder, panic rising in my throat. The gunfire was getting closer. I could hear footsteps, heavy boots on the floor, more shouting. Fred's eyes opened slightly, just barely, but he couldn't seem to wake up fully. Later, I would understand why. The drugs O'Neill had given him had rendered him almost comatose. The bedroom door burst open. Multiple men in heavy coats rushed in, weapons drawn. I could see the silhouettes in the dim light, could see the guns pointed at us. I threw myself over Fred, trying to protect him, trying to shield his body with mine and our unborn child's. We have a pregnant sister in here. I heard one of the Panthers shout from another room. But it didn't matter. The police didn't care. The gunfire was deafening. I heard bullets hitting. The walls, the mattress, the furniture. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, thick and acrid. I pressed myself flat against the bed, my arms over my head, praying that my baby would survive, that somehow we'd both survived. I heard Fred groan. Then I heard one of the officers say, "He's barely alive. He'll barely make it." And then I heard 2 more shots, point blank, right into Fred's head as he lay in our bed. Unable to defend himself, unable to even fully wake up, they shot him twice in the head to make sure he was dead. This wasn't a raid. This wasn't self-defense. This was an assassination. The shooting continued. Later, we would count 99 shots fired, 99 shots fired by the police, and only 1 shot possibly fired from inside the apartment, likely Mark Clark's shotgun discharging involuntarily when he was hit. Mark was killed too, shot to death in the living room. But the police and the FBI would later claim it was a shootout, that we had fired at them, that they had acted in self-defense. When the shooting finally stopped, I was dragged out of the bedroom. My hands were cuffed behind my back. I was 8 months pregnant, traumatized, and they were treating me like a criminal. They dragged the other survivors out too. We were all arrested, all charged with attempted murder of police officers. Can you imagine? We had just survived a massacre, and they were charging us with attempted murder. I saw Fred's body as they dragged me through the apartment. He was lying in our bed, blood pooling around his head. His eyes were open but unseeing. The man who had spoken to thousands, who had organized communities, who had dreamed of revolution, he was gone. And our child would never know his father. At the police station, they paraded us in front of reporters. They told their story of a vicious gun battle with violent extremists. They showed off the weapons they'd supposedly recovered. They painted Fred Hampton and Mark Clark as dangerous criminals who had fired on police officers executing a lawful search warrant. But I knew the truth. I had been there. I had heard it, seen it, lived through it. And I wasn't going to let them bury that truth. I end the days and weeks after December 4th, I was released on bail. I gave birth to Fred Hampton Jr. on December 29th, 1969, just 3.5 weeks after his father was murdered. Holding my son, looking into his eyes, I made a promise to Fred and to our child. I would make sure the world knew what really happened that night. The Panthers organized tours of the apartment, bringing in thousands of people to see the evidence before the landlord could clean it up or the authorities could tamper with it further. The bullet holes told the story. Nearly all the shots had been fired into the apartment, not out of it. The trajectory of the bullets, the location of the shell casings, the blood spatter patterns, everything contradicted the police's version of events. I gave my testimony to anyone who would listen. I spoke to reporters, to civil rights lawyers, to community members. I described in excruciating detail how Fred had been drugged, how he couldn't wake up, how the police had executed him in his bed while I lay beside him. I described the terror of those moments, the sound of my unborn child's heartbeat in my chest as bullets flew around us, the image of Fred's lifeless body to MY testimony, along with the physical evidence and the testimonies of other survivors, sparked a federal investigation. The truth began to emerge. The informant William O'Neill was exposed. The floor plan he'd drawn for the FBI was revealed. The drugging of Fred was uncovered. The entire COINTELPRO operation against the Black Panthers began to unravel under public scrutiny. In 1970, a federal grand jury criticized the actions of the Chicago police and the FBI but didn't indict anyone. This wasn't justice, but it was an acknowledgement that something deeply wrong had occurred. We filed a civil lawsuit against the Chicago Police Department, the Cook County State's Attorney, and the FBI. It took 12 years, but in 1982 we won. The federal government, the city of Chicago, and Cook County settled the case, paying $1.85 million to the survivors and the estates of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. Money couldn't bring Fred back. Money couldn't give my son his father. But the settlement was an admission, however reluctant, that what happened on December 4, 1969, was not a legitimate law enforcement action. It was a political assassination. My testimony helped destroy the FBI's narrative. It exposed COINTELPRO to the American public, revealing the extent to which the government had gone to suppress political dissent, to destroy organizations fighting for justice, to murder leaders who dared to challenge the status quo. The documents that eventually came to light through the lawsuit and through the church committee investigations in the mid-1970s showed a pattern of illegal surveillance, harassment, and violence against the Black Panthers and other activist groups. Fred Hampton was 21 years old when they killed him. 21. He had so much more to give, so much more to teach, so much more to organize. Our son grew up without him, but I made sure he knew who his father was. I told him about Fred's brilliance, his courage, his love for the people. I told him about the programs we ran, the coalitions we built, the revolution we fought for. Living through that night changed me in ways I'm still processing decades later. I carry the trauma of those moments with me every day. I hear the gunfire in my sleep sometimes. I see Fred's face, feel the panic of that morning. But I also carry his legacy. I carry the responsibility to tell the truth, to make sure that what happened to Fred Hampton is never forgotten and never repeated. The story of December 4, 1969, is not just about Fred Hampton or the Black Panthers. It's about the lengths to which the government will go to silence dissent. It's about the value placed on Black lives in America. It's about the courage it takes to stand up for justice when the system is designed to crush you. I survived that night, and my survival had a purpose. My testimony, the testimony of a 19-year-old pregnant woman who watched the man she loved be executed by the state, helped expose one of the most shameful chapters in American law enforcement history. It didn't bring Fred back, but it told the truth. And sometimes, especially when power wants to bury that truth, speaking it is the most revolutionary act of all. Fred used to say, "You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution." They killed Fred Hampton on December 4, 1969, but they didn't kill what he stood for. His words, his organizing, his vision, that lives on. And as long as there are people willing to tell the truth, willing to fight for justice, willing to remember what happened in that apartment on West Monroe Street, the revolution continues. I am Deborah Johnson, now known as Acu and Jerry. I am a survivor. I am a witness. And I am the mother of Fred Hampton's son. This is my testimony, and it will stand as truth long after all of us are gone.